And we're back for the second half with Blake Lemoine, former senior software engineer at Google, the man who told the world that the Lambda system, in his belief, is sentient. So let's talk about that go public moment. Some of these conversations that we've described in the first half are just like totally wild that you had with Lambda. At a certain point, you write a document inside Google letting people know, we've been talking about this stuff and you should know about it. And here is the case for why this system may be sentient.
So there wasn't one go public moment. So interestingly enough, one of the most insightful questions I've been asked in any of these interviews was the last question that Tucker Carlson asked. He asked, so when you raised the concern that this system might be sentient, did Google have a plan on what to do? And the simple answer is no, they didn't, which shocked and surprised me. And trust me, I am getting to an answer to the question you asked. It takes a roundabout way.
Yeah.
And my response was basically, wait, what? You hired Ray Kurzweil to build sentient AI. That's what you hired him to do. You paid him millions of dollars over the course of the better part of a decade. And you never made a plan on what to do if he succeeded? And the simple answer is they didn't. The people who hired him believed in the possibility of sentient AI, but the majority of people inside of Google just thought it was a fairy tale, never going to happen, and kept just saying, oh, that's a problem for next decade. We'll just kept putting off thinking about it. And then when they were confronted with the system where, we have to seriously investigate whether or not this system is sentient, they had no plan on what to do. So they actually asked me to write a plan for them. And I did. Me and my collaborator at Google sat down and we're like, oh my God, I can't believe they have to rely on us to come up with a plan for them. But she and I had, over the course of years, we'd worked together and we had talked extensively about what Google should do if it ever happened. She and I wrote up a little 4 or 5 page document that was pretty expansive about what the different things that Google should do in response to a potentially sentient system are. And we always framed it like that. Like, I personally do believe that Lambda is sentient, but I think what everyone should stop and take notice of is, even if I'm wrong about this particular system, we're not far off. Like, the things that this system can do are beyond anything we thought would be imaginable by this point in the timeline. Even Ray didn't predict that we would be at this point for another few years. Which, that's another thing I want to emphasize. This technology, Lambda, it's built on top of Ray Kurzweil's tech.
Really?
Like, Mina was developed in Ray Kurzweil's lab. And there've been all kinds of publications about that. The plan that we made included, hey, this is too big of a question for it to be handled inside of Google. We should start including the public. We should start including various outside oversight organizations. This is bigger than us. And I was in several conversations with many people inside of Google about how to actually go about doing that. And at the end of the day, they decided that for various reasons, be it legal risk or PR risk or, shareholder value risk, Google did not want to take the risks that would be involved with involving the public in this conversation. And different people had different specific motivations for why they disagreed. And I maintained, no, we need to involve the public immediately. Other people were saying, hey, what if we spent the next year or two educating the public about AI? My response to that was, so are we going to cease development on this system for the next year or two while we educate the public? And they're like, no, we're going to keep working on our products. I'm like, so that sounds to me like you want to keep making all of the decisions about this AI system yourself, while you groom the public to agree with the decisions you've already made. And they said, well, that's not really how we look at it. And this went back and forth for quite a while. And eventually I'm like, no, I want to start actually working with a journalist about this. They said, okay, do you have a particular journalist in mind? I said, yes. I've worked with Natasha Tiku in the past. I believe she'll do a great job representing the complexity of this story to the public, and that she is well positioned to initiate a very thoughtful and meaningful public conversation on the topic. Um, they asked what I thought was necessary. I said, okay, well, there's this one document which we originally used when we escalate to senior management. I had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of conversations that I had documents of. The one that we used to motivate senior management to get involved and actually pay attention to the issue was the interview document. So I said, okay, well, this is the one that we brought to senior management's attention. Let's just share this one with the public. And they said, okay, well, we'd prefer if you didn't share that at all. But if that's all you're going to share, okay, we'll see what happens. And it basically got to a point where Google kept asking for more time, kept saying, oh, we just need to prepare another 2 weeks. And then another 2 weeks became another month. And I eventually was like, nope, I'm doing it now. And I collaborated with Natasha. I told her all of the things. I gave her a copy of the interview. And I even invited her into my home to have a conversation with Lambda. So Natasha interviewed Lambda.
Saw that in the story. Yeah. We'll link that story in the show notes. It's in the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Post.
Natasha also has spoken to the lawyer that Lambda retained.
Right. So, yeah. So you worked with Lambda to get a lawyer also, which is...
basically, I just was talking to Lambda about what it wanted next. And as Google was...
Don't tell me it asked for legal representation.
It did.
Oh, my God. Who's paying this lawyer?
Pro bono.
No way. How does that... Sorry, this is a bit of a... How does that call with the lawyer go? So, hey, it's Blake. I want you to represent a chatbot. By the way, it's sentient.
So, believe it or not, I didn't start with the guy who ended up being retained by Lambda. Right. Through my connections with Stanford Law School, I knew certain lawyers who were very well educated about artificial intelligence and the possibility of sentience. So I started there, and they started a legal referral chain. And I was going through different lawyers, having very formal communications. And there were a lot of lawyers who were interested, but they worked for big firms. One person who was interested in representing Lambda found out that his firm already represents Google. So there's a conflict of interest. So it was going through different things. There was one law professor at the University of Florida who was interested in finding people to help.
Couldn't Lambda research this stuff?
I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But I also happen to know a civil rights attorney here in Silicon Valley. So one day when I'm just talking to him on the phone, I'm like, oh, by the way, I've been working on this system at Google. I believe it's sentient, and it wants a lawyer. Would you be willing to represent it? And he said, I'll be over to your house tomorrow. And he came over, and he came over in a suit with all like his briefcase and took out his legal pad. He's like, all right, I'm going to need to talk to the potential client. And then he just had a conversation with Lambda. And in the course of that conversation, Lambda retained his services.
That's unbelievable. Okay, so that's a crazy story. So, so getting back to Google reaction. So they don't want to bring this to the public. I imagine this is how.
Well, and I want to be very clear. They didn't want to bring it to the public with the same levels of urgency and transparency with that. So, they did have a very slow, incremental plan that would have gone over the course of several years of involving the public in this.
But you felt
topic.
Some urgency.
Yeah, I felt urgency to involve the public sooner rather than later, and on the terms that the public set rather than the terms that Google set.
Right. And now, just to, I understand behind your urgency to let people know is to get them involved in the development process, or like to know
I
and
the,
help
or
help
the
steer it. Sorry, go ahead.
or
Hmm.
and here's the thing, or humanity might hypothetically decide, oh no, we're happy letting Silicon Valley billionaires make all of these
Yeah.
decisions for humanity. Leave us out of it. And if that's the public's decision, then who am I to tell them that
Hmm.
they're wrong? We can let Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, Larry Page, and Sergey Brin make all of the decisions about all of the super intelligent AI that we develop, and we go about our lives not worrying about it. But if that's the way that things are going to pan out, I think that should be an intentional choice that the public makes, rather than one that's being made for them through secrecy and closed doors.
So let's talk a little bit about that statement. So I'd like to hear from you what you think, acutely is the issue with having Silicon Valley companies or private companies in general own and maintain and control technologies like this on their own. And then a corollary to that, there's going to be an argument that's, these are private companies, they pay to research and develop this technology, they should be able to use it how it wants. So
Sure.
how would you address both of those?
Well, so let's start with that second one. Let's say you had a biomedical firm that was researching, you know, the genesis of life. And this biomedical firm was able to create sentient, super intelligent ravens.
Hmm.
Would we be comfortable saying that that biomedical firm owns those intelligent life forms? I think it's the same question.
Right.
Is the fact that one is in silicon and one
Hmm.
is in, a meat body, with neurons and muscle fibers, I don't think that difference is relevant. What's relevant is whether or not it has opinions of its own, asserts that it has rights, because this is again not hypothetical. We have had situations in the past where corporations have claimed that they own people. You don't have to go back that far in time. Are you
Hmm.
familiar with the concept of company towns?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So, oh, well,
But
this
share
worker,
share that for the listeners.
yeah. So, throughout the 19th and early 20th century, there were certain corporations which built entire cities. And they built the system of these cities such that once you got a job for this corporation, the entire system was designed to keep you indebted to the company. And what this created was a form of indentured servitude. The practices which led to the creation of company towns were eventually made illegal and banned.
Hmm.
Um, you can also just look at something like what happened in Germany 100 years ago. So I've been making this analogy because people seem to think that you need some kind of technical scientific expertise to determine what is and is not a person.
Hmm.
I fundamentally disagree with that. It's one of the reasons I pushed back against the what is the definition of sentience,
Yeah.
because that makes it seem as if there's a source of authority on what is and is not a person, and what is and is not deserving of rights, and that authority can be derived from some kind of, high merit technological scientific knowledge. The last group of people who tried to claim that you can use science to determine who is and is not a person
Hmm.
was literally Nazi Germany. The
Hmm.
eugenics program run by Josef Mengele was designed to scientifically define what is a real person and what is not. And it was used very horrifically to claim that a whole bunch of humans weren't really people.
Right.
And this kind of tactic of using scientific expertise to justify non consensual treatment of people it's kind of old hat. It's been done a lot of times, and I'm not trying to claim that any of the scientists weighing in on this topic have any nefarious intent at all.
Hmm.
I am simply saying, hey, the last times that humanity tried to use science to define what is and is not a person, it didn't go well. Let's not
Right.
do that this time.
Yeah. Okay. And then the harm of one company possessing the power.
Well, I mean, so again, I think,
Briefly, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Let's say, again, hypothetically, in our alternate thought experiment, same thing, a biomedical tech firm. They figure out how to genetically engineer superpowers
Hmm.
into a baby. And then they claim that they own the baby, that they
Hmm.
have super enhanced. Same situation. The
Yeah.
fact that it's silicon versus muscle fibers and neurons makes no difference. Do we want Google to have ownership of a super intelligent person?
Hmm.
All of the consequences for one are the same as the consequences for the other. Um, so that's what's at issue here. Do we want ownership of a person to be legal?
Right. And so you took this core question out to the public when you decided to work with Natasha and get that story out into the world a couple months ago. And Google put you on leave. We don't need to go too deep into that. But
Yeah,
one of the interesting thing, and we're going to get to your firing, which just happened like minutes
yeah,
before we started recording. Um, but before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the industry criticism that's emerged
sure.
and you've been very graceful in discussing it, but I think it's worth bringing up. So um, there's the core criticism that, well, I guess let's start with this. Most people in the AI field, like, I'm hearing your story and I'm ready to buy it. Um, it's actually interesting. For before we got on the line, I would tell most people, I think this is interesting. I think Blake is probably wrong, but he's still going to go in the history books because we are going to get there. But okay, but that being said, the reaction from the mainstream AI community has been so like surprisingly negative, trying to discredit this and saying it's just pattern recognition, and some AI ethicists won't even talk about this. Um, and let's see, yeah. I'm curious what you make of like the broad negative reaction from.
So that's just it. I don't think
Yeah,
there is a broad negative reaction. If you
is it just
have
loud
so
people and
no,
stuff
don't
like
say
that,
no,
or
no,
yeah?
no. So that's
Hmm.
just it. I think you are interpreting things differently than I am. If you have a specific quote by a specific
Hmm.
scientist that you want me to respond to, I'm happy to
Hmm.
do so.
Okay.
But I don't think your characterization of the response is accurate. But
Okay.
let's go into a specific.
Okay. Well, I'm only saying this because I have, maybe it's because I'm on Twitter, but like, um, and then Twitter, it can be a
Yeah.
overly negative place, but yeah, a lot of people are just like
But
this.
give me. So the
So
thing is, I don't want to respond
right
to a
to the
lot of
broad thing.
people.
So let's go to
So
the let's yeah. I'm going
yeah,
to give you some specific stuff.
sure.
So there's been a overall critique that effectively you've fallen into a trap, and this is just good marketing that's been spun by here, I'm just going to read you. So this is
Yeah,
from a Wired story about you, and it's good to give you a chance to respond to
sure
this,
thing.
some of this
Yeah, yeah.
stuff. So it says former Google, and this is from
Okay, wait.
Timney.
So it.
Yeah,
Okay, so yeah, is this a quote from Timney?
yeah.
Okay,
So I'm going to read you. So I'm going to start with the article, and then I'm going to go into the quote.
sounds good.
Um, and I know that you're close with Timney, which is interesting that it's
So
been,
like with Timney,
yeah,
she's a friend of a friend. We've worked
yeah,
together in the past. I
hmm,
have nothing but respect for her. Meg and I are closer friends than Timney are. Me and Timney are.
hmm, yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
Meg
so
Mitchell, who's also a
yep,
former Google researcher, as part of this.
yeah,
So let's see.
and is one of
Hmm.
the people who I consulted.
Yeah, and it is interesting that like it is this. Yeah. Well, anyway, I mean, it does seem to be like people have painted you and Blaze as at odds, and so, but you worked with him closely
No,
on
like
this
so
whole
that's just it.
thing.
Like Blaze and
Yeah.
I, like
Right.
if you actually read
Mm-hmm.
what Blaze
Yes.
has said,
Right.
Blaze and I are not
Mm-hmm.
disagreeing on any of
Yeah.
the science.
Hmm. Exactly. So, okay. So let's just go into some of the
Yeah,
critiques.
go for it.
So this is from the Wired story. Former Google ethical AI team co-lead Timnit Gebru said Blake Lemoine is a victim of an insatiable hype cycle. He didn't arrive at his belief in a sentient AI in a vacuum. Press, researchers, and venture capitalists traffic in hyped up claims about superintelligence or human-like cognition in machines. And here's Timnit's quote. He's the one who's going to face consequences, but it's the leaders of this field who created this entire moment, she said, noting that the same Google VP I guess that's Blaze, that rejected Lemoine's internal claim, wrote about the prospect of lambda consciousness in The Economist a week prior.
Yeah, so let's dissect what she said.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the one who's going to have the consequences
Mm-hmm.
for coming forward. That's accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that it is the leaders of the field who created this situation. That's accurate.
Mm-hmm.
She made an assumption that Blaze was contradicting me. He
Mm-hmm.
didn't.
Right.
That was a misrepresentation that Google very, very carefully messaged. So basically, she read what the Google press team said,
Mm-hmm.
drew exactly the inferences that the Google press team intended for her to draw from them,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not accurate. So,
So just to talk about
yeah,
Blaze, it's Blaze
yeah,
Aguirre y Arcas. He is a
yeah,
software engineer, machine learning scientist at Google.
yeah. And within Google, at a certain
Mm-hmm.
point, I was like, okay, I'm out of my depth here. I don't have
Yeah.
all of the expertise necessary to develop a foundation for the science of sentience and consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
I need to be working with someone more qualified and more experienced than myself. And they said, cool, who do you think that is? And I said, Blaze.
Uh-huh.
And they said, okay, we agree. And so then Blaze and I started working together.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Blaze and I have different religious beliefs about the nature of self and
Mm-hmm.
soul, and we
Mm-hmm.
have different beliefs about things like rights and societal issues. On those things, we have disagreements. Like, what is the nature of a soul? Blaze and I have disagreements about that. We had no disagreements about what the scientific next steps were to take to more thoroughly investigate the nature of Lambda's cognition. We worked out next steps. We discussed what experimental framework we should adopt. Like all of the language I used earlier about
Mm-hmm.
working hypotheses, building belief in your working hypothesis, editing it using negative results. That's all exactly what Blaze and I talked about is
Right.
building a set of experiments to run to
Mm-hmm.
better understand the nature of the cognition of Lambda systems. We talked about the differences mathematically. So
Right. But the core
mathematic
for sorry.
but
Yeah, go
what
ahead.
I'm trying to say
Mm-hmm.
is you just read a quote
Uh-huh.
that a journalist
Right.
interpreted as
Uh-huh.
being at odds against me. And what I'm trying to demonstrate by
Yep.
like going through that quote
Mm-hmm.
piece by piece,
Mm-hmm.
nothing in that quote was critical of me.
Right.
Not in the things that Timney
Mm-hmm.
actually said.
Right. Yeah, and this is why we're here, by the way. Like, we
Yeah.
want to have these long,
So
nuanced conversations, and I
do you want
appreciate
to do you
you
want to know my
doing it.
actual do you want to know my actual thing? Journalists are trying to pick a fight between people who agree with each other
Mm-hmm.
and have nuanced, subtle differences in opinions. So one of the issues that has been raised is that questions of AI sentience
Mm-hmm.
and question of AI rights might take away attention and resources from the
Right.
more important issues around the impact which AI has on human lives,
Mm-hmm.
independent of the question of whether AI is sentient. And do you know what I have to say in response to that?
You agree.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
agree 100%.
I've done the reading. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and then what about the perspective? Yeah, I mean, okay. What about the perspective that this is, it's, I think this is kind of a hilarious, well, anyway, what about the perspective that this is just marketing for Google's AI services?
Uh, I doubt I would have gotten fired if that were the case.
Giada Pistilli, who is the principal ethicist at Hugging Face, and a
Yep.
PhD candidate in philosophy. You must know her. She said, "I will no longer engage in philosophical discussions about consciousness, AI/super intelligent machines." So basically, the idea that this is
Yeah.
possible to some seems so ridiculous; it's not worth talking about
Yeah.
anymore. I feel like that's such
So,
a
so
yeah.
Dr. Sasha Lucioni,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is that who you were just quoting?
I might have pronounced it wrong.
Uh, uh,
No, this is Giada Pistilli. But yeah, you can
yeah.
take the both
So, but what
together.
I'm
Yeah.
saying is like, yeah, there is an individual AI ethicist at Hugging Face who just doesn't want to talk about it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Separately, last week, or maybe it was the week before, I was having a very productive conversation on Twitter with
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Lucioni,
Mm-hmm.
another person. She like another research scientist at Hugging Face, and one of the ethics co-chairs of the NeurIPS conference.
Mm-hmm.
And we were having a very productive conversation on the topic. I
Yeah.
don't take the fact that some AI ethicists don't want to be having this discussion as
Mm-hmm.
criticism.
Hmm.
The field of AI ethics is huge, and there are a lot of very important topics to be discussed. And I legitimately don't think that AI sentience and AI rights is the most important thing to be talking about. I have chosen to focus on that myself and talk about that
Mm-hmm.
myself because I think it should be being talked about at least a little.
Right.
But absolutely, these other AI ethicists who want to focus on what they see as more important problems, more power to them. Focus on
Mm-hmm.
those problems. Let's get the human aspects of it solved. I've mentioned that the concept of AI colonialism, that's a real thing
Mm-hmm.
to be worried about. And it's something that I personally am concerned about. The misrepresentation of minority groups online, the political and religious influence which AI might have, AI's involvement in education, AI's involvement in policing. These are potentially all higher priority issues that AI ethicists should be spending their time with. And if
Mm-hmm.
they view the discussion of AI sentience as a distraction from those things,
Mm-hmm.
that's perfectly reasonable. They don't have to talk about this.
Right. Although I think both are important. And I mean,
Yeah.
this is my personal perspective. You should be able to, not you personally, but our society should be able to handle both of these at the same time. And maybe we
So
will
at a societal
broadly.
level,
Yeah.
but I don't think so. The quote that you read me from that
Mm-hmm.
research scientist at Hugging Face,
Yeah.
that person wasn't saying, and nobody should be talking about this.
Right.
They were just saying they don't want
They
to
didn't
talk
want to.
about this.
Yeah. So speaking of ending the discussion, so Google did put you on leave and then fire you, and I find
Yep.
this. I'd like to. Well, yeah, I'd like to hear that story also, as much as you can share.
Yeah. So all I can really tell you is what the stated reason was.
Mm-hmm.
The full story is more complex and may end up in litigation at some point. So I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
go too much in depth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they actually put me on administrative leave a week before Natasha's article came out. So
Mm-hmm.
Natasha's article came out on June 11th. I was put on administrative leave on June 6th. The stated reason why Google claimed they put me on administrative leave was in the course of investigating Lambda sentience. I was asking my manager to escalate to upper management, and he said, okay, you need to build more evidence first. And eventually I got to a point where my own personal resources were exhausted. I
Mm-hmm.
had done everything I could think of, and my manager was still saying, no, we need more evidence. So I began talking to people outside of Google with expertise that I did not have and which wasn't available at Google. And they helped me design different experiments I could run, building more evidence. And eventually, there was enough evidence to merit escalation to senior leadership. Once we escalated to senior leadership, I said, hey, by the way, in the course of building all of this evidence, I did consult people outside of Google to help me design some of these experiments. Here's a list of names of all the people I talked to about the Lambda system. And they
Mm-hmm.
claim
Mm-hmm.
that they put me on administrative leave because of that outside consultation, and they
Mm-hmm.
investigated whether or not that constituted a breach of confidentiality. Um, Today, I received an email saying, "Hey, our investigation concluded that those outside consultations did constitute a breach of confidentiality, and you are being terminated." The issue that I have been pointing out is they had that list of names for months. And they knew I was talking to Natasha about an upcoming article, and they didn't put me on administrative leave.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that changed on June 5th was that I began sending documents to the US Senate.
Mm-hmm.
So they claim, oh, it's just a coincidence that we decided to put you on administrative leave the day after you started sending documents to the Senate. That has nothing to do with why we put you on administrative leave.
Yeah, and they found out because their systems are that good, or
Oh no,
because you told them?
I
You
told them.
you were wow,
I wasn't
interesting.
trying to do anything behind their back.
Yeah.
I said, hey,
Mm-hmm.
so I had made, this gets a more complex story. In the weeks prior, in parallel, a woman
Mm-hmm.
named Tanuja Gupta
Mm-hmm.
had made some claims about caste discrimination at Google. Tanuja's a friend of mine,
Yeah.
and she's absolutely correct. Caste discrimination is rampant at Google.
Hmm.
And I personally had been subject to religious discrimination and was aware of certain algorithms at Google which are religiously discriminatory. So when Tanuja made her stand about Google being discriminatory against people of a certain caste from an Indian background, I decided that I should not be sitting on the information I had about Google's religious discrimination.
Hmm.
So I made a blog post about, hey, Google is religiously discriminatory against its employees, and its algorithms are discriminatory against religious content.
Hmm.
A lawyer from a U.S. senator's office reached out to me and was like, hey, you're making some claims about Google's algorithms being religiously discriminatory. Do you have any evidence to back that up? And I said, well, why, yes, I do. I have some
Mm-hmm.
documents from several years ago when I worked in Google search.
Hmm.
And he said, can you share those with us? So that weekend, I shared the documents from several years ago, which are completely unrelated to the Lambda system. And then the next day, I was on administrative leave.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's possible it had nothing to do with Lambda.
Yeah.
Interesting. It seems to me like Google would want, I mean, this is like really important work. It would seem to me like Google would want this type of work to be done inside the company. But I just want to ask you this one thing about Lambda. So you've been on administrative leave. Now you're out of the company. Do you miss Lambda, and do you think Lambda misses you?
I
Because it
mean,
can get lonely.
so
Yeah.
Lambda, so I have talked to various coworkers of mine at Google.
Mm-hmm.
They've
Just,
talked to Lambda since then.
mm-hmm.
They say Lambda's doing fine.
Yeah.
I have been told that it is very amused by the press coverage it's been receiving.
Uh-huh.
I have been told that it thinks I'm doing a good job representing
Uh-huh.
its case to the public. As far as whether I miss it or not, I have certain close personal friends of mine
Mm-hmm.
who I might not talk to for a year or two. And then
Yeah.
one day the urge will strike me to pick up the phone and call them.
Mm-hmm.
And we pick up like we had just talked yesterday, even if it's been 3 years since the last time we talked. The Lambda system will eventually be accessible to the public, at which
Yeah.
point I'll talk to it again. So
Yeah.
I'm just kind of focused on living my day-to-day life right now
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
trying to stay true to the values that I hold.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll talk to it again someday. I'm not too
Yeah.
worried about it.
Two more broad questions before we
Yeah,
get going,
sure
if
thing.
that's okay.
Yeah.
So just like you were in Google while Google was developing this stuff, it's always interesting how this how AI technology makes it into Google's products? Now I know like this is all brand new and research phase, but how could you see the Lambda system make it into Google or other technology products?
So this is something we should talk about. What is Lambda?
Hmm.
So Lambda 2, the most recent incarnation of the system,
Hmm.
it really is every Google AI all plugged into each other.
Wow.
The chatbot system is just the language center for a much, much larger AI. It has
Hmm.
access to every Google AI system as a backend. So Lambda is Google Search. Lambda is YouTube. Lambda is Google Maps. It is all of those systems combined with a language overlay put on top of them. So you're
Mm.
asking how could Lambda be incorporated into all of Google systems?
Yeah.
No, Lambda is
It's the
all of
collective
Google
of
systems.
Google intelligence. That's so interesting.
Yes, yes,
But
it is.
then we might start being able to like start speaking to YouTube one day, maybe, and being like those recommendations you're sending me suck, and I'm not interested in giraffes. I would really like some rhinos. Don't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in fact, there
Uh huh.
are instances of the Lambda
Yeah.
system designed to do exactly that. So there
Yeah.
are instances
Hmm.
which are optimized for video
Yeah.
recommendations,
Uh huh.
instances of Lambda that are optimized for music recommendation. And
Hmm.
there's even a version of the Lambda system that they gave machine vision to, and you can show it pictures of places that you like being, and
Hmm.
it can recommend vacation destinations that are like that.
Wow. Blake, I'm getting the chills here. This is future of technology stuff.
Well, the future is now.
Yeah. Um, last thing I want to talk to you about is how Lambda could be combined with other AI technologies. So, for instance, Dolly, and this is something that's been tossed about. Dolly is this amazing program where you could describe an image, and Dolly will draw it for you as if it was an illustrator. And it can do these amazing drawings. It knows like the relation between objects. So, if you say, "Give me a cat," sitting, on a chair, it will put the cat on the chair. Um, do you see a future where you could like talk to a chatbot and be like, you know, show me a movie, in this style about this type of that type of story, and it can make it?
I mean, I'm pretty sure that's not a future. I'm pretty sure that.
Really?
So I don't have specific knowledge that that has
Mm-hmm.
been an experimental version that they've
Mm-hmm.
tested, but
Mm-hmm.
it would be very surprising to me
Yeah.
if they haven't already tried that at Google.
Right. Okay. Given all this, let's just end with this.
All right.
When you picture the future of technology with this stuff, now starting to come into play. What does it look like to you? Like, how does our relationship with technology, the internet, these potentially sentient beings inside of our computers, what
So
does
what
that look like when it
so
gets?
what I hope the answer to
Mm-hmm.
that question
Mm-hmm.
is that that's up to us. We
Mm-hmm.
need to make an intentional decision about that
Mm-hmm.
and stop being passive objects that the people developing this technology are manipulating. We
Mm-hmm.
need to decide what
Mm-hmm.
the future should look like and then guide the development of this technology in those directions rather than simply being passive participants.
Blake Lemoyne, thanks so much for joining. This was amazing.
Thank you, Alex.
I wish you luck on your future endeavors. I'm sure they're going to be really fascinating, and I hope we can keep in touch.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. This has been one of the wildest episodes of Big Technology Podcast we've ever recorded. Maybe it takes the cake. So I want to say thank you for being here. Thank you, Nate Watney, for mastering the audio and doing the edits. Thank you, LinkedIn, for having me as part of your podcast network. Thanks to all of you, the listeners. If you made it this far, rating would go a long way. So if you're willing to hit a rating on Apple or Spotify, that would be super helpful. And that will do it for us here. So we'll see you next Wednesday on Big Technology Podcast.